Hello and welcome to another Marks Marine Lowrance training tutorial. Today we're going to be going over the basics of the HDS operating system. This is applicable to the HDS Gen 2 Touch, HDS Gen 3, Elite 7 Ti, and all of the modern Simrad NS series fish finders. The first thing to note is the Pages key. Your Pages key is your main menu option for the Lowrance fish finders. When you hit your Pages key, you go to your home screen. This is like the desktop on your computer. On the left, we have our settings. At the center of the screen, we have our full screen views. And on the right, we have our custom splits. If you want to make a custom split for your Lowrance fish finder, it's really easy. You just drag down until you get to the window with the plus. You hit that button, and then you just drag over any views that you want to see on that split. So if I want to see my chart and my sonar, and I want to throw a structure scan on, I can rearrange these windows any way that I want. It's a really powerful feature on the Lowrance operating systems. We've already got a number of splits set up in this unit, so I'm going to go ahead and discard this custom view. For most fish finder users, you're just going to want to click on the full screen views at the center. You've got your chart, which is your GPS mapping. You've got your traditional 2D sonar, and you've got your structure scan. This boat is equipped with a TM150 chirp transducer and the newest structure scan 3D technology. So we've got quite a few fun toys to play with today. We're just going to start with the chart and go over the basics of the chart menu system. So you click on the chart, and that brings us to a full screen map of Hayden Lake, where we're on right now. You'll notice that we're currently overlaying our structure scan data behind the boat. Anytime that you have touched the screen, you're going to get a cursor on the screen. That's going to allow us to mark a waypoint. So you'll notice on my structure scan that I marked some rocks out here to the side of the boat, which might be good fish habitat. So if I want to put a waypoint on those, I just hit this flag key here, which is your waypoint key, which brings up the option to make a waypoint. I can select my icon. As you can see, I've got lots of different choices, and we do recommend using different icons for different objects. So I'm marking a rock pile, so I'm going to select the rock icon. I'm going to rename it. It's just as easy as clicking on the waypoint 012. I'm just going to clear that, and I'm just going to give it a generic rock name. This could be something like your favorite fishing hole, etc. If you start to accumulate a lot of waypoints, we do recommend this as it allows you to find those waypoints quicker. Just going to save it, and there it is on my screen. To clear your cursor, there's two ways to do it. You can hit the clear cursor here at the top of the menu, or you can hit the X key here on the side. Either method works. It's important to note that while the cursor is out, the map is going to be fixed on the cursor. So if you go on a road trip, the map is still going to be fixed where you had that cursor out. If we want to turn our overlay off, I just click on my overlay button here at the bottom, and I change what it is. Things that you can put on the overlay include the structure scan, the radar, on a boat that has a radar. Obviously this one's a little too small for that to be a necessary option, or the weather if you've got one of the LWX weather modules. From my chart options, I can change my orientation. Right now we're set to north up. A lot of people don't like north up. They would prefer a course or heading up. I would change that by clicking on my orientation, and I could change it to heading up or course up depending on what my personal preference is. Course up is the direction that you're traveling. Heading is the direction that the boat's currently facing. So these two lines are similar but not always the same, particularly if you're in rough water. You'll notice right now that we're laying a lot of trails behind us. This is obviously one of our favorite fishing grounds to hit. If you want to turn those trails off on the screen, there's a couple of ways that you can do it. The way that we recommend is to hit our Pages key, go over to the trails, and I'm just going to hit this display off button here. So I'm still recording that trail. I obviously want to keep tracking where I've been going, but now I've turned off the display. When I return to my map, you're going to see that all those trails vanish from the screen. Nice and easy. If I want to make a new trail, and see where we've been fishing on this particular outing, I just click the new trail here. I can change my color real easy. I can pick whether to display it and whether to record it. This is a really handy feature, particularly if you're getting into waters that you're not comfortable with and you want to keep track of where you launched the boat and where you went traveling, or if you get into heavy fog. So we just started a new trail. You'll notice here that I've got access to my routes and my waypoints. If I hit my waypoints, you can see all the waypoints that we've got on this unit. Most of the time we're just putting in generic names on this particular unit. On the bottom you have the ability to delete all by symbols, so if you've got a waypoint that you're just placing as a temporary marker of where you're catching fish, you can delete that symbol very easily. Next we're going to cover the traditional 2D sonar. This is still our best tool to find things like thermoclines and more accurate fish depth. We're going to bring that up by clicking on our full screen sonar. Our options here on the side of the graph are a range. If you get into really deep water, you can take this out of auto range and just look at the top 150 feet, or any range that you really want to look at. We don't recommend looking at more than 150 feet at a time on any fish finder, as your fish targets start to get very, very small. Next up, we've got frequency. We'll cover frequencies in a little bit more depth in a later tutorial, but this would be where you would change the frequencies available to you. We've got a TM150 true chirp transducer, which means the only frequencies we have available to us on this particular boat are our 83 fixed frequency and a true medium chirp. We do have an option, because this is a true chirp transducer, to pick exactly a frequency within that 85 to 145 kilohertz band that we want to be looking at. We happen to know that kokanee, like what we're looking at right now, show up really well to 105. So we've actually got it hard-coded right now to be at 105 kilohertz. Next up, we've got our sensitivity. Generally speaking, unless you're a very advanced fish finder user, with any of the modern Lowrance units, I would recommend leaving it in auto and staying within 4 ticks up or down from that auto sensitivity. The auto sensitivity on Lowrance actually functions very, very well. There are some advanced tricks that you can do if you're bass fishing in particular, where you might potentially want to take it out of auto sensitivity. But for your average user, I would strongly recommend leaving it in auto sensitivity and adjusting up or down from there. To adjust it up, I just hit the plus key at the top and I'm adjusting my sensitivity. You'll notice as the sensitivity goes up, my noise also goes up along with that, and I start to pick up really fine small target sources. Now where this comes in handy is you can see that I'm starting to pick up my thermoclines here at the surface much more strongly. If you've got a weak thermocline and you're trying to mark the depth that it's at, dialing the sensitivity up really helps. As you dial it down, you'll notice that I've now lost those thermoclines and I've started to lose some of the fish targets as well. So why, generally speaking, we recommend being a little bit on the positive side of the auto sensitivity. Okay, so we just passed over some good fish targets, so we just want to show you what those look like. We've obviously been marking kokanee here for a while, but we've got a number of objects right here close to the bottom. You'll notice that some of these targets are in motion relative to the boat, where we're not getting a traditional arch. And that's really handy information. We'll cover that in the later tutorial when we're going over advanced sonar tutorials. One thing that's really important to note, and we'll cover this in greater depth later, our 2 axes are not what most people think. So most people on a fish finder think that our axes are distance and depth. Our axes are actually range and time. So what your fish finder is doing, and I'm just going to turn on the amplitude scope, this is what our transducer is literally seeing. It's sending out a cone in 360 degrees beneath the boat, and everywhere that it hits an object within that disc, it's going to return the distance from the transducer to that target. And that's what's painting our arches. It's taking this real-time signal and it's moving it across the screen with time. Next, we're going to talk about color line. Generally speaking, we like to leave our color line within about 73 to 80%. Generally 76 to 78 in our local waters is about where we're finding that we want to be. You want to dial your color line up till we're starting to mark some of our big predator fish, but not so much that everything's looking like a predator fish. And we're really using it to give us target separation. It is important to note that the fish with the brightest colors are not necessarily the largest fish. they are the targets that are returning the strongest return. That means that we're likely hitting things like bones and air bladder and things that are very different from the water. But if that very large fish is swimming at just the right angle to the transducer, he will appear much smaller than he actually is on your traditional sonar. And a small fish that is swimming perpendicular to my beam is going to return much larger than he really is. But on average, it's a fairly safe assumption that your brighter targets are your larger fish over a course of time. To adjust that, we would hit our color line, and we could dial it up or down. So we're just going to go to an extreme just to show you what it looks like. So I've dialed all the way down, and you'll notice that all of my fish have become blue. That's my weakest target on this particular color palette. If I dial it all the way up, you're going to notice all my fish have become green. That is my strongest color on this color palette. Generally, you want to leave it so that your trout, your salmon, your big fish on an inland lake are your yellows. Your bait fish are your reds and your blues. So we're marking a lot of nice 14-inch kokanee in here. So now we're going to go over the view options for our traditional sonar. If you hit view, this brings up our options. You'll always have back as your top option on any submenu. Next we have our splits. When you click on your splits, our options are zoom, bottom lock, and flasher. Unless you're ice fishing or you're a very old school fisherman, you're probably not going to use the flasher. Lowrance leaves that in for legacy purposes. This is our traditional amplitude scope in a radial fashion, and it's really popular for people who are ice fishing. Our bottom lock essentially locks onto the bottom with our view, so if you're bottom fishing, you're going for the pike, and you want to be rendering that whole water column, but you want to also zoom in on the bottom. This would be the split for you. Our zoom is what most people would use. We're only in 30 feet of water, so it's not very applicable here. But essentially our zoom when we're in a very deep lake allows us to look at a smaller subsection of the lake with a nice clean picture without risking losing our power and losing our ability to hold that bottom lock by manually reducing our range. We're just going to put no split here because at 30 feet of water a split really isn't needed. And we're going to hit back to back out of that menu. Our next options are our palettes. We're going to cover this real briefly. On our color palettes, we've got number 1, 2, and 3 are general purpose color palettes. Most fishermen leave it in color palette 1 and never touch it. That's a 4-color, evenly distributed color palette. You'll notice on the screen here that we're in some logs right now, and we just passed over a tree beneath us. Color palette 2 is exactly the same as color palette 1, except it's inverted on its colors so that the background is blue. And color palette 3 is our highlighting color palette if you're looking for suspended targets. For your average fisherman, particularly if you're interested in bottom hardness, color palette 1 is not a bad choice. Next up, we've got color palettes 4, 5, and 6 are monochromes. Honestly, those are largely relics of the black and white days for those that insist on not changing. I can't think of a strong reason where you'd want to be in one of those color palettes. 7, 8, and 9 are nighttime color palettes. If you want to be fishing at night and not ruin your night vision, they're a black background. I would argue the better way to use those would be just to switch the whole unit into night view. Color palettes 10, 11, and 12 are deep water target marking color palettes. They reserve the red for any of our strong signals, and they're best used in saltwater environments or when you're in very deep water and you're looking for those large tuna or something. Color palettes 13 and 14 are what we like to use the most in inland waters as long as we're not bass fishing. These are what's called bottom highlighting palettes. The advantage of a bottom highlighting palette is it allows us to see that weed cover as a different color from the bottom itself, and allows us not to waste the band that the bottom is taking up on our amplitude scope for a color palette. This means we get a lot more color separation. We can pick up 5 colors for the water column to help to separate those trout from the kokanee. Color palette 14 is identical to color palette 13, but it's a blue background. When you're in deeper water, typically then we would want to be going to the blue backgrounds to pop out those large fish and dial our sensitivity up and get rid of all that noise. When you're in shallow waters, personally I prefer the white backgrounds. Next, we've got our temperature graph. The temperature graph is essentially your fish finder's attempt to determine what the temperature depth is that it's putting on your screen. And it's using the thermocline to try to determine about how far down that temperature reading extends. You'll notice 3 lines and where it thinks that the temperature that it's displaying on your screen actually is in the water. This can be useful if you're trying to target a specific fish species, but it is a software approximation. Your temperature is actually taken directly on the transducer. There are products like the Fishhawk downrigger sensor if you're really concerned about what the temperature is at a particular thermocline band that you're fishing in. Next up is depth line. If you're in color palette 1 and you want to try to separate out those weeds, the depth line would be the option that you would want to select. It's not very obvious here because we've got a white background, so I'm going to switch to a blue. Depth line essentially paints a white line on top of what it thinks is the depth. So if you're in that color palette 1, that color palette 2, and you're trying to determine what's weeds and what's bottom, your depth line would be what would help you separate that out. Amplitude scope we touched on briefly earlier. Your amplitude scope is your real-time sonar. It's what your sonar is literally seeing in real time. Your amplitude scope allows you to respond to targets much quicker than on your screen, as fish appear on the screen about 5 seconds before they appear on the fish finder. It also lets you see what your signal health is. So right now I see that I've got a real big fat bead on the bottom. I'm in absolutely no danger of losing my bottom lock. If I was to get into deeper water, I would potentially have some risk of that. We've got our fish ID here at the bottom. At Marks Marine, we like to call this the grandson mode. We've got a lot of customers that like to turn fish ID on. They're used to older, less powerful units, or they don't know how to read the arches and they don't want to see the clutter. You really want to see the clutter. We're passing over a couple of nice trout here. So you can really see with the color separation the difference between the kokanee and our nice trout targets down there. So fish ID, and we're going to lose our trout, basically puts symbols on all the targets. Now the disadvantage with it, you'll notice all these nice kokanee up here on this top band at about 10 feet. We just lost all those. It's not marking those with fish ID. If you were on a less powerful Lowrance unit or a Humminbird or a Garmin where it literally replaces the arches with the fish ID, it would not be painting these targets with any fish symbols and you wouldn't think there was anything up here. It would only have marked those 2 trout that we passed over. Depths, other than the font being too small, depth is a fantastic thing. It tells us on the screen what depth those are at. I can tell just by glancing at it that those trout were at 41.3 feet with the depth markers on the screen. You'll notice this object right here. This is a fish in motion. He accelerated towards the transducer. We've got a longer line coming up. Then he was traveling with the boat for a little bit. He was flat relative to our transducer. And then he tailed off. He started exiting the transducer. So it's pretty common to see lines like this, particularly if you're jigging and you can actually see your jig. This can be a really handy tool to see if you're catching something. Next, we're going to cover the advanced options. This is where you can start to get yourself in trouble with the settings. At Marks Marine, we're going to set most of these settings up for you, and other than spring and full turnover, I wouldn't recommend changing them. We're going to go over them real quickly. Noise rejection essentially determines how many of these single pixel dots to take out of the picture. Generally speaking though, you'll notice as I'm dialing it up, we don't see a huge improvement either way. We did take out some of the snow, but we lost some of these potential real weak targets. There's not a danger of dialing your noise sensitivity up, so if you want to get some of that snow out of the screen, feel free to put that up, but generally speaking, we like to leave it at off or low. The one that you can really get yourself in trouble with is the surface clarity filter. We would never recommend that you put this higher than low. And I'm going to turn on the amplitude scope to show you the dangers of it. So remember how we were talking about the amplitude scope being our real-time signal, and the width of these beams is the strength of our signal. So we're going to turn on that surface clarity filter. We're currently at low. I'm going to turn it to off. And you'll notice how much stronger all my targets got, how much more yellow I picked up in the screen, how much wider my target beads got on my amplitude scope. If I put it to medium, you'll notice that I lost a lot of those kokanee, and my beads on my water column essentially are almost non-existent. If we put it to high, for all intents and purposes, they are non-existent. I might still pick up a trout, but I won't be able to pick up anything else. The technical definition of what you're doing with the surface clarity filter is we're lopping off a lot of those side lobes that exceeds that amplitude line, and we're really narrowing what we're looking at in that beam. So that means that we're losing all of our surface, and we're losing some of the width of our cone itself. So generally speaking, again, we recommend off or low. We've got a lot of noise in the water. It's a hot summer day, so we've got a lot of transition. So low is perfectly acceptable today. I do like being able to see it because you can really see the direction of the water. And with it off, I can literally see that these kokanee are stacked off of a temperature band here. I suspected that already because I already had the snow going up to there and I had clear above it, which is indicating that we've got water in motion in this band here. Given that our surface water temperature is 72.2, my guess would be that that is warm water dropping down into the colder water. Okay, next we want to cover scroll speed. Generally with the scroll speed, we recommend adjusting it in inverse proportion to the speed that you're going. So as you go faster, you want to dial that scroll speed down. As you go slower, you want to dial that scroll speed up. And what the scroll speed dictates is how quickly you're moving that real-time picture over. So the slower you're going, the faster you want to be moving that over to make your arches well defined. The faster you're going, the slower you want that to be going. Here we've got a fish target real close to the bottom there. Ping speed. Generally speaking, well, ping speed was a very relevant feature for the older pulse generation fish finders. With the chirping units, we don't see a lot of reason to dial your ping speed down. In real shallow water, the argument was that the higher ping speeds was making a lot of noise on the water and potentially spooking the fish. Particularly with the Lowrance fish finders, we're not actually putting a lot of power into the water. We're relying on much longer waves to get our energy in the water. So generally we would recommend it at max. If you go more than 18 or lower than 18, we're going to lose the chirp capabilities, which means that we're going to start picking up a lot more noise in the water. Manual mode, unless you're an advanced fish finder user, I do not recommend putting it into manual mode. This would allow us to directly influence the settings of the unit, and for most users it's the best way to make sure that you're not seeing any fish. We've got the log sonar option right down here. If you're wanting to make your own mapping with the Insight Genesis mapping, this is where you would do that. You'd put a card slot in the unit here. You see I have one in here. If you're hooked to a Wi-Fi, you can upload to Insight Genesis, but generally speaking, I don't recommend uploading across the cellular network because the upload itself takes a little bit of bandwidth. We can create a structure map if we want to record a longer map behind the boat, and we can select our format. So you want to pick the best format available to you. We've got the SL3 as we've got a structure scan 3D. This means that if we wanted to, we could see the weed heights in our Insight Genesis account. I would just hit record, and it's going to start recording. So I'm recording now. You're going to get a periodic pop-up box here on the bottom reminding you that it's recording. You're also going to see a flashing red dot in the upper left-hand corner. If you are recording mapping to the Insight Genesis, we recommend stopping it about once an hour. This helps to make sure that we don't have a corrupted file and that we're able to upload good data. It also means that we can upload multiple files simultaneously. Next, we're going to be covering our structure scan mode, so I'm just going to click on my full screen structure scan. So I'm in 3D mode right now, which is painting my fish column. So those kokanee schools that we were marking on our cone here, I can see which side of the boat they are and where they are relevant to the boat. You can also see why your traditional sonar is useful but not that useful. It was telling us about the depth that they were at, but it wasn't telling us which side of the boat they were on or where they were relative to the boat. You'll notice that I've got pretty much a stream of fish along the structure here to the side of the boat, off to my starboard side. But those kokanee schools are really out here to the left of the boat, and we were previously marking them about 10 feet down. Obviously, this is one of our favorite spots to go fishing for kokanee. And if you can't get your limit of kokanee here, you probably shouldn't be fishing for them. We're in color palette 6, which from our testing is the best color palette for the 3D structure scan. We're going to go ahead and switch now to our side scan modes. So in our side scan mode, we're looking left and right, and right now we're looking out about 200 feet from the boat. We're going to switch to a high lighting color palette. Pretty boring bottom, not much to look at here. And we're going to go ahead and put our contrast back up to auto. So this is allowing me to see where my hard bottoms are on my lake, and looking at those fish out to the side suspended. In your side view, your bright targets, or your strong targets, are going to be bright. So anything that's higher in the water column is going to be a stronger signal. We're going to get a better beam return on it. And those are going to be bright objects. So we're looking for shadow. And we're just going to scroll backwards here because we know that we passed by some trees. So you'll notice that we've got some logs laying on the bottom here. We've got a tree that's casting a shadow right there. We've got some more shadows off to the side. The length of the shadow is going to help us determine how tall that object is and how high up in the water column it is. It's also going to potentially allow us to spot suspended fish. One of the things we don't like about the 3D structure scan is we don't have access to our 800 kilohertz mode. Our 800 kilohertz would be our preferred method for spotting shadows. We're limited to the 455, which has a little bit longer range and a flatter beam. Our suspicion is that Lowrance did this to simplify the calculations on the 3D, as that does require some complex calculations. It's important to remember with your structure scan that we are still a beam transducer, and we are still measuring range. How structure scan differs from our traditional sonar is, rather than sending out a cone into the water, we're sending out narrow fan-shaped discs to either side of the boat. So we're getting a much more accurate picture of the bottom. We can actually see the weeds out here to the side of the boat. We would recommend, when you're using your structure scan, whether we're talking 3D, side scan, or down scan, that you'd be traveling somewhere between about a half mile an hour and about 6 miles an hour in relatively straight lines. If you do large skews, if you're weaving back and forth, we're going to be duplicating any fish on our structure scan 3D. We're also going to be smearing the bottom on our side scan. The picture will hold to about 10 miles an hour, and will start breaking up between 10 and 15 miles an hour. You can use your side scan mode in deep water to spot fish. If we were going to do that, I would either switch to color palette 7 or color palette 8, and I would dial the contrast higher. You may not be able to see it on the video, but that's really making these fish pop out in this black. As you get in deeper water, the ground is going to drop away and our whole picture is going to be black on either side. And that would allow us to spot those big trout on Pond Ray or Coeur d'Alene out to either side of the boat. We can also switch to our down scan. Pretty boring lake bottom here. Unfortunately, most of our regional lakes are fairly boring, so there's not much to look at except for sand and a couple of fish here. But if you're ever in question about what you're looking at on your 2D sonar, your down scan is what's going to resolve that for you. So we're passing over some seaweed here, and with your down scan you can literally see the structure of the seaweed. It's important to note with your down scan that fish are true to scale. So even though this little red dot here looks like he's a pretty small target, he's actually a pretty large fish because we're in 50 feet of water. So that would definitely be something that you'd want to keep there. Remember, bright targets are our stronger signal returns. So in this patch of seaweed, I see there's a bright little yellow dot hiding in there. So I've got a fish essentially hiding in that weed cover there. With your structure scan, you can see bottom hardness really easily. And we're going to just kind of cover the palettes real quickly. Color palettes 1 and 2 are your monochromes. Again, there's not a strong reason for those. Color palettes 3 and 5 are our best color palettes for looking at shadows. Without that 800 kilohertz mode, that's not as effective in the 455. Color palettes 7 and 9 are our best all-around color palettes. Neither of these two color palettes does anything particularly well. Both color palettes do everything okay. Color palettes 7 and 8 would be our best highlighting color palettes. Color palette 7 on the down scan, particularly when you're in heavy weed cover, is amazing for spotting fish that are hiding in those weeds. So you can see that fish that we were talking about earlier here. We've got another fish laying off this log right over here in this other weed cluster. It really makes most of the fronds of the weeds just vanish because we end up with a light blue and our sticks and our fish hiding in those weeds show up as a bright green. We're going to switch back to our left-right. It's important to note with the 3D structure scan, you cannot switch to 3D mode while you're in down scan. You have to switch to a left-right to switch to your 3D mode. We're just going to switch to our 3D mode here. And we're not in the appropriate color palette for this mode. Would strongly recommend color palette 6 for most of your fishing here. We've done a lot of playing. Color palette 6 gives us 3 different colors for suspended targets. Our red targets are going to be our strong targets, our brown targets are going to be our medium targets, and our blue is going to be our weak. So your blue and your brown could potentially be wave action, etc. When you're in your 3D mode, it's very, very important that you're not looking at your motor thrust. As I dial this up, we're going to dial this until we see our motor thrust. So right now I could be about auto +5 would be my guess. Typically we're plus or minus about 6 from the auto sensor depending on our depth. If you dial your sensitivity too high, you're going to start picking up your motor thrust, and then your motor thrust is going to look like a line of fish along the surface. You can see that we've lost our good kokanee fishing. We've traveled too far down the lake and we're no longer seeing those kokanee schools out to the side. But I'm currently looking 84 feet to the starboard side of the boat, which is about the distance to the shoreline here. And I'm looking 117 feet to the port side of the boat, which is pretty good. So we've got a couple of crappie or bass hiding under that dock that we're just passing by here. This can be an incredibly useful tool to spot if water is a profitable water to be fishing in. When we were scouting the lake earlier this morning looking for spots to shoot the video, we first started in the shallows. But given the temperature, we weren't spotting any fish. It looks like they've all migrated to this cooler water. Doesn't really surprise me. The fish, generally speaking, don't like to be much above 68 in our particular body of water. Our surface temperature is 71.9, so that 10-foot band that we're seeing there is probably about 68 degrees right now. Back in the back bays, we were up at 75 degrees. That's pretty warm for fish. It's pretty warm for humans too, so might have been a good day to cool off. You'll notice as we're passing these docks here that we're marking pretty good fish out to the sides. You can also see the pilings from the docks as these shadows on the screen. The pilings themselves, though, unless I put my sensitivity very high, are not likely to return. Vertex enhancement. The 3D structure scan is essentially painting a 2D image on the bottom, and it's using an old bump mapping technique to cause rocks and other objects on the bottom to appear as 3D objects as I pan and tilt the screen around. The higher you dial that vertex enhancement, the more obvious those terrain features are going to be. But if we dial it too high, we're going to start to see some signal error. Generally speaking, we find that low is about appropriate. We do have a little bit of artificial height added to those objects, but makes it more obvious where those objects are. The one thing we don't like about the current iteration of the 3D is we did lose a lot of ground resolution. That's why typically when we're using this, we're running the side scan and the 3D at the same time. We use the 3D to spot the fish, and we use the side scan to take a better look at what the terrain is to find those brush piles. If you make a sudden course correction or you're in anchor mode and you're really screwing up your picture, Clear Live History essentially zeroes the picture and allows us to start over. This can be really useful if you're dialing your target sensitivity up to see the smallest objects possible. And end up with that motor thrust and want to clear that motor thrust from the screen. Our 3 buttons here, this one returns the vessel. This one brings us into cursor mode, where we can basically mark a waypoint and travel backwards in time. You hit the boat icon to return to the vessel. When you're marking a waypoint with a 3D structure scan, we recommend tipping the picture so you're looking up. So if I want to mark this red school of fish over here, I would just go into cursor mode. I would put my cursor right over that target right there, and I would hit my waypoint icon like this. I'd pick a generic fish symbol so I was keeping track of the fish. Generally, I keep one fish symbol for each fish species I'm going after. And then we would hit that to return to the vessel. So now if I had a TR1 autopilot or the Motor Guide XI5, I could literally navigate back to that fish if I so chose. Contrast, generally speaking, autos are pretty good, but basically as you dial that down, your picture is going to become darker. As you dial it up, your picture is going to become brighter. The 3D, it largely just covers the bottom of the lake. It doesn't have a lot of application. If your source is set to this unit, and we're using a 3D structure scan, which is a network device, we're just going to see random snow because we don't have a transducer physically plugged into this graph. So we want to make sure that we're looking at our S3D on the network here. So we're going to cover the side scan real quick and look at some objects on the bottom here. You can see my shoreline coming out here along the edge here. You'll notice I've got a stick on the bottom based on the shadow it's casting. It's probably not going to show up in the video, but I've got a faint bright line here, and then it's casting a arc. You'll notice I've got some rocks over here. As I change color palettes, I can really make these objects stand out. If you want to optimize for shadows, you can see how clearly that shadow is now popping out. See these long straight lines here? Those are trees on the bottom that are casting some shadows here. Your structure scan is your #1 best tool to spot objects where fish are going to be congregating. This is important, particularly true for fish species like walleye or bass, where you're looking for those brush piles, those rock piles, those things that they're going to be stacked off of. And once we've located those objects, we're going to start to look to see if there's actually any fish stacked off those objects. This can allow you to cover large amounts of water very, very quickly. This morning when we were scouting the lake to figure out where to shoot videos, we probably went through 3 or 4 bays where there were, for all intents and purposes, no fish. We saw some boats fishing in those bays. They obviously need to learn to use their electronics a little better. They're probably not going to be very profitable. The purpose of a fish finder isn't to catch the fish that you're spotting on the fish finder. It's to locate what kind of things are the fish doing. We're noticing that those kokanee are off the shore about 200-250 feet in about 10 to 15 feet of water. And we're seeing that they're in a school along this bay here, and they're pretty much following the shelf of this bay. We noticed that we had some crappie and bass tucked under the shadows of the docks here as the sun's starting to get warmer. We can see some logs here on the bottom. And this is going to give us an idea of where we might be seeing fish. If we switch to our highlighting palette here, we're starting to see some bright yellow dots hiding amongst these logs. That's telling me that I've actually got some suspended targets by that structure. The other possible explanation for a yellow dot would be a vertical object that we're looking at. But since I don't see any shadow on it and a 455 kilohertz frequency, we can be pretty confident that those are fish targets there. You can also use your yellow color palette to determine if your bottom's getting harder or softer. You would look in straight vertical lines, and if in that straight vertical line the bottom is getting brighter, it's turning yellow, we would know that it's getting harder on the bottom there. You don't want to be looking left and right there. Our first section is our vertical water column, and if you've ever been to one of our advanced seminars where we get into this a little bit in more depth with some visual aids, you would remember that the side scans are also a ranging fish finder. Got some jet skis out there making some noise for us, I see. What the ranging means is when we're looking at an object, if I'm marking this fish right here, and I'm marking him right now, looks like he's 208 feet from the boat and about 111 feet to the starboard side of the boat. That's telling me that he's 111 feet from the transducer, not that he's 111 feet out perpendicular. When you're in open water, it's going to be much more accurate because we're not going to have any of that downscan beam. But it's pretty common to have it some ratio of those two distances when we're looking at those objects. So just keep in mind that you can't drive straight to that fish. It's just giving you a ballpark that fish is going to be in. Honestly, fish will strike if you get close enough, so unless you're fishing in the middle of winter, that's probably not a big deal. We just passed over some pretty impressive submerged logs here, just to show you what those look like on the screen. We're going to switch to one of our highlighting palettes here, and you can really strongly see those logs. Search and Rescue likes to use this color palette when they're looking for objects that are floating in the water. And it's really a good tool if you're looking for those shadows. You can see here that we've got a very tall tree that we passed by that could be a potential prop killer there. We were already aware of its location, which is why we're hugging just a little bit further offshore. And I can see my shoreline right out here at about 200 feet from me. This is a national forest off to the side of it. It's one of the smallest national forests. So we've got a lot of deadwood that comes down the hillside and ends up in the lake here.